My final paper for this class is entitled "Comparing Mongolian and Alaska Native Shamanism, the Entrance of Christianity, and Current Religious Practices." In 2007, my family and I moved to Mongolia. Within a few weeks of being there, my childhood interest in American Indians was rekindled as I began to make a connection between the Mongolian lifestyle and what I knew of American Indians. Our church was holding some meetings about 6 hours away from the capital city, and we were fortunate enough to participate. As I rode on the bus, looking out the window, I was astonished with the landscape and living conditions that I saw. The families in Mongolia live a nomadic lifestyle. They move their home from their summer and winter homes. On the left, you will see a picture of a winter home that was taken in the summer. The low buildings are shelters for animals, and they are nestled up against the hillside to protect them from the harsh winter and heavy winds. On the right is a family who has just moved from their winter home to their summer home. This grass has not yet become green, but have already moved and are ready to start herding their animals to their summer locations. Mongolians typically have herds of goats, sheep, cows, and horses, although sometimes you will find yaks, and other parts of the country have reindeer. In the countryside, Mongolians live in a small, round tent-like structure called a ger. However, I was amazed to later discover that the original Mongolian dwelling was a teepee. Typically, a family's water source is a mile or two away, and there's no electricity. Modern gers, however, now sport solar panels which provide enough electricity to charge cell phones and power televisions. Once we arrived at the church meeting location, I was able to observe Mongolians who had come from all over the country. It was then that I saw what looked like an American Indian stepping out of pages of time, only they were wearing modern clothing and were Mongolian. In these pictures you will see people who have slanted eyes, high cheekbones, flat noses, high foreheads, and straight black hair, very similar to most American Indians. Another similarity are the sports between Mongolians and American natives. They are typically individuals, like wrestling, horse racing, and bow and arrow competitions. In fact, we have had American Indians come from the United States in the summers to compete. Our purpose in moving to Mongolia was to train Mongolians to be missionaries to their own people groups. Our job was to dissect their culture and compare it with Christianity. We learned that they have old names and new names for spiritual things. For example, an old name for God was Sky God and referred to an unknown, most powerful god. Legend has it that Chinggis Khan counseled with the sky god as well as many other types of gods, and continued to be prosperous and successful in conquering other lands as long as he prayed to all of the gods, including the sky god. His son, however, became the Khan after him, and all the Khans that followed him chose not to include the sky god in their plans and decisions. History shows us that no Khan was ever successful as Genghis Khan. It is interesting to note that both the Mongolians and the Haida, at least in their history, both believe in a heavenly God. The article by Charles Harrison painted many interesting pictures of the Chief of Light and the Chief of Darkness. The Chief of Light, in particular, paralleled many of the biblical beliefs of a heavenly God. In more recent Mongolian history, the shaman was the primary source of healing, prophecy, guidance for future, blessings, or curses. Sergei Khan's description of a shaman is very similar to the duties of a Mongolian shaman. He states, "The shaman was the key intermediary between humans and other than human person and powers of the world. He cured the sick, controlled the weather, brought success in war and in fishing and in hunting, and foretold the future." Mongolian shaman ceremonies can take place in a variety of places. Not long after we moved to Mongolia, I was lying in bed listening to an Indian drum slowly, methodically beating through the night. I didn't know what it was, but soon I learned it was my first shaman calling for the spirits. I also observed a female shaman as she entered and exited a home where she performed a healing ceremony for a sick child. Most ceremonies, however, occur in the countryside. Some areas have established ceremonial spots among the trees, with large rocks arranged in particular order and flag-type cloths hanging from the trees. Other times a group will choose a spot among the trees and hold a one-time ceremony for a particular request. One summer day we were having a picnic with our Christian Mongolian friends in the countryside. We were eating among the trees near a river when we began to hear the sound of a beating drum. A small number of us went to investigate, and we found a shaman ceremony that was about to begin. The Mongolian who came with us as a translator asked if we could observe from a short distance, to which we were given permission. The ceremony had been requested by a family seeking advice regarding a business opportunity. The shaman was dressed in a black robe with long sleeves. He wore a woven hat and a black headdress with long, twisted ropes hanging down to the front of his face. Tall bird of prey feathers stood straight up on either side of the headdress. A blue and gold sash was flung over his shoulders along with a wolf pelt. Colorful whip-like ropes lay in his lap along with other sacred objects. The shaman sat cross-legged on the ground with his head bowed down, never looking up. This ceremony was unusual in that an apprentice was also in attendance. This younger man sat next to the shaman dressed in similar clothing and headdress. In one hand he held a large, hand-made drum in front of his face. In the other was a short, fat stick. We were told that the mask was always worn so that no one could see the face of the shaman, as it would distract the humans and prevent the spirit from entering. This is in contrast to the masks made in Nunavik Island, Alaska. Their masks had eyes for the shaman to see through, but were later filled in to render the dancer blind. Furthermore, the Mongolian mask is not made of wood or other hard materials, such as the one Lee describes, that are made of driftwood and painted. The Mongolian mask is almost always black, is an extension of the headdress, and made with yarn or other material. The mask is thick, with a multitude of dangling ropes, so that the eyes and face are always hidden, even though the shaman sways quite violently when going into the trance. Eventually the shaman we were observing indicated to the family the ceremony was ready to begin, and the apprentice began to beat the drum with his stick. Slowly the pace got faster and faster, until the beat was going at least 4 beats per heartbeat. It is said that at this pace the natural rhythm of the heart is interrupted, and the spirit is able to enter into the shaman. At this point the spirit, which was addressed as grandfather, entered into the shaman, and the family proceeded to ask their questions. The voice was low and gruff and difficult to understand. The apprentice, however, seemed agitated and frustrated. The ceremony itself did not last very long, and we later learned the apprentice was upset because the spirit had never entered him. Once the ceremony was over, the shaman demanded food and vodka, which he proceeded to eat, still sitting in the same place and position. Changes in the spiritual structure of an indigenous tribe, regardless of country or region, typically came from outside sources, although there are stories and legends of various spiritual or tribal leaders believing in a god similar to the Christian God, such as Chinggis Khan, or the Haida belief in the Chief of Light. Sergei Khan describes that Tlingit elders claim that shamans had foretold the coming of the white people and Christianity, but that they have always known the true religion, the Great Spirit in the heavens, and prayed to him. Still others claim that they have always kept the 10 Commandments and were true Christians, not of the white people. Mongolia's more recent history of spiritual invasion began hundreds of years ago with Tibetan monks. Shamans and other religious leaders were captured and forced to convert to Buddhism. If they refused, they were killed, and Buddhism reigned as a dominant religion. As a result, shamanism went deep undercover, and ceremonies such as the one we witnessed were almost extinct. For a brief time, Christianity entered Mongolia in the late 1800s. Around the same time, it began to make its appearance in Alaska Native people groups, as is told by Bainin, Khan, Lee, Pointer, and Russell. However, it was severely oppressed, first by Buddhism, then obliterated in the 1920s under Soviet rule. Christianity began an increase in popularity once again in the early 1900s when Russia pulled out of Mongolia and the country gained independence. Interestingly, shamanism also began to emerge as an accepted religious practice. The entrance of Christianity into Alaskan Native tribes was primarily peaceful. In the 1830s, Ivan from Russia made connections with the Tlingit people when he entered the villages consumed with smallpox epidemics. The villagers began to trust him as he worked among them and brought healing to their people. Interest in Christianity sparked when they realized that their healers were unable to heal the sick. They were dying, yet the Russians were still alive. In Pointer's book, Miracle on Metlatka, William Duncan first became friends with the Indians by learning their language. Because of his desire to be their friend, learn their language, and not cheat them or sell them whiskey, they began to ask him about God. Soon Duncan was living among the people, healing their sick and preaching about God. He then established a school for the village children and eventually created a clean, well-organized community that rigorously followed a set of rules created to maintain a Christian lifestyle. When the initial contact of Christianity may have been relatively peaceful, the following years of influence are quite diverse. Some locations had a strong leader who prohibited many of the tribal ways, such as dances, singing, alcohol, and shamanism, as described by Lee and Pointer. In both of these instances, the villagers were converted Christians who maintained Christian villages and churches. In the village of Nuviak Island, Alaska, the church was eventually turned over to trained local men, who took on leadership responsibilities of the congregation. Other locations, however, had more mixed results. The methods of some Christian missionary groups have used more forceful methods of conversion by attempting to abolish the tribe's traditions and customs. Probably the most common and lasting outcome is a mixed belief of shaman and Christianity. We found the prevalent belief in Mongolia is that spirits are to be manipulated to get what is wanted. This is accomplished by worshiping certain gods in prescribed ways, traveling certain distances or directions to confuse the spirits, or asking for a mediator to pray for them. In many circles, it is doubted that true conversion to Christianity occurs among native people groups. In Mongolia, it is common to visit the home of a baptized Christian and see that they still have an ancestral memorial for a deceased member of the family, complete with idols, incense, and a picture of the deceased loved one. We also knew of those that hired shamans in times of great financial need or healing, even though they were Christians. Sometimes change occurs as long as it seems to not interfere too much with the traditions, or if they profit gain that is greater than the action. In Russell's article, it is said that, at Tlingit perspective, it is feasible to think that the villagers believed they were letting go of a portion of their culture that no longer served its function. Shamans were unable to heal diseases that the Western medicine could. With healing came the demand or desire to have faith in Western religion, and so therefore they became Christians. The history of religion among Mongolians and Alaska Natives is long and complicated. It can be difficult to unveil the truth that hides beneath layers of culture and tradition, both among Native people groups and Western Christianity, and the role they currently play in today's society. My paper is just a very brief overview of some of these factors.